have been so many good games coming out of China recently. Wuchang was pretty great, and Black Myth Wukong sold something like 30 million copies. The type of thing only Call of Duty games used to do. So, they've got something good cooking with game devs over there. That's kind of where we are with Swords of Legends right now. Some gaming outlets got roughly an hour with the demo at the last Summer Games Fest, and there seems to be this sort of dance-like quality where you're flowing between combos and parries in a rhythm that felt more like a fighting game than the slower, more deliberate pacing you get from most games in this space. But at the same time, there were also some hiccups, mainly around timing. But hell, more good action adventure / Soulslike type games, the better. So I want to break down what Swords of Legends is doing that's different, where it might stumble, and whether this is something worth keeping an eye on before we have a release date. So, what is Swords of Legends? Well, it's a reboot of the Gujian series, a pretty big series in the Chinese RPG space that's mostly flown under the radar in the West. The original released back in 2010 and since has spanned multiple single-player titles and even an MMO that actually launched around the world back in 2021 under the Swords of Legends name. Same title, completely different game. The series never quite got the global push it needed to break through in the same way that, say, Genshin Impact did a few years later by being in the right place at the right time with the right platform. Aurogon Shanghai is the studio behind this reboot, and they've been working on it since at least 2021. And they're building it on the notorious Unreal Engine 5 for basically everything except the Switch. Yeesh, I hope they take the time to optimize it. We've seen so many games with issues that just don't take the time. A positive, which really should be the norm, is that there's no free-to-play hooks, no battle pass, just a complete action RPG you buy once. The game itself takes place in a primordial age where humans, gods, and demons all exist within the same world. There's no separate realm locked behind the late game portal or a hidden area you unlock after 50 hours. You play as Pan, a fallen swordsman who's died and been brought back to life by Yama, the ruler and judge of the underworld in Chinese mythology. But you don't come back as a hero on a redemption quest or a chosen one destined to save the world. You come back as an underworld enforcer, basically a mix of Chinese folklore and Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho. That's for the anime fans out there. The setup gives the game a reason to throw you into conflict with everything from rogue demons to rival factions to spirits. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm kinda tired of open world games all over the place. Sometimes you just want a fairly linear game that guides you through curated areas, places the devs have made sure to be interesting and fun. The areas themselves look spacious enough for exploration, side quests, and optional things without the bloat that comes from trying to fill a massive open world map with enough activities to justify its size. A good example of this is Stellar Blade. It used a similar approach last year, and it kept the pacing tight while still giving you room to wander when you wanted to. The environments they've shown so far back this up with a sort of mythical, ethereal look to everything with impossible looking structures in the background. But you can also see these isolated mountaintop communities that have been completely overrun by demons. Both feel different enough to be interesting in their own way. Now, the combat is what most people are going to care about, and it's where most of the previews spent the bulk of its time. Most games in this space keep things heavy and deliberate. Every swing carries visible weight, every dodge is a commitment. The whole experience is built around tension and patience. That's a formula from software established, and it works. But it also creates a specific mood that can start to feel samey when you've played enough games in the genre. Swords of Legends isn't throwing that foundation out entirely, but it's layering this sort of crazy-ass wuxia flying kung fu on top of it in a way that changes how the combat feels. Your character moves in more fluidity than you'd expect from a Soulslike, and the combo strings have a natural momentum where one strike chains into the next without the pauses that usually telegraph weight and impact. Now, that doesn't mean the combat is weightless, it just means the rhythm is different, maybe faster, more like the back and forth you get in Sekiro when you and the enemy are trading deflects. I could definitely see myself getting a real kick out of becoming a parry god in this game versus multiple enemies at the same time. It's exactly the kind of loop that makes these games satisfying when everything clicks. One thing I did notice is that you're rewarded for staying active in combat. There are notches in the bottom right corner of the screen that appear to fill up when you land attacks and successfully dodge, and that resource can then be spent on your more powerful abilities. The devs haven't broken down exactly how this works yet in a dedicated deep dive, but it looks like one of those systems that really wants you to stay aggressive. The artifacts are where the combat starts to separate itself from the pack. They showed a couple of them off in the demo, the Cosmic Mirror and the Thunder Banner. The Cosmic Mirror is the defensive option, and it lets you summon glyphs that can either deal area damage to groups or block and parry incoming attacks. Kinda looking like parries in Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. And that's a pretty wild thing to think about in a pseudo-Souls-like. You don't usually hear fighting game lingo getting used for these, which really makes it important to get the controls right. The Thunder Banner, on the other hand, is the aggressive option. It adds lightning damage to your core attacks and replaces your standard dodge with a quick dash that covers more ground, which shifts your entire approach from patient defense to even more pressure. Nioh 2 played with a similar idea through its Guardian Spirit system, where each one altered your moveset and gave you access to burst counters. But here, it feels like a much more important part of your moment-to-moment gameplay. There's also an umbrella artifact that showed up in one of the trailers that I'm sure works in a completely different way. Lots of choices are always good, and there's supposed to be over a dozen different weapon types by the time it releases, each with its own moveset and complete combat style. In the preview, we saw a glaive, a two-handed sword, and what looked like a polearm, with you being able to switch between them mid-combat. It's not entirely clear yet how freely you can swap between equipped weapons, whether there's a limit or whether you can chain everything together. But the idea seems to be that your loadout is defined by both your weapon and the individual attack skills you slot into it, similar to how Nioh's stance system gives each weapon multiple movesets depending on your stance at any given moment. What really caught my attention though was the soul capturing system, because it does something I haven't seen executed quite this way in a Souls-like before. A bit in other action games such as Black Myth Wukong. After you beat certain bosses, you can take their soul and summon them as an active ally in later fights. One of the early tutorial bosses is a hammer-wielding oxhead, and if you know anything about Chinese mythology, which I really don't, but I checked up on before I recorded this video, Oxhead and Horseface are the two guardians who escort souls into the underworld. Once you take him down, he offers to join you, and from that point on, you can call him into combat whenever you need backup. And this isn't a summon that pops in for one attack and then vanishes. Oxhead sticks around, fights beside you, absorbs hits, and you can pull off these cinematic link attacks where you and the summoned boss team up for a coordinated strike on a staggered enemy. They even seem to physically move in front of the player to block incoming attacks, almost like a messed up looking Pokemon trying to help its master. Nioh 2 let you use soul cores from defeated yokai to fire off special attacks, and that felt more like equipping a spell than fighting alongside a partner. Swords of Legends makes the summoned boss feel like they're an actual ally. They draw aggro, they damage enemies, there's even a thread to how you earn the respect of bosses, and then having them fight for you being a lot more satisfying than just collecting another trinket for your inventory. However, they did show some of the classic padding lots of games think they can get away with. They later reused the Oxhead character with a more powered up version, as that's something I absolutely grew to hate with Elden Ring, with how many times they repeated a boss as filler for dungeons and jails. And well, it can't all be flowers and sunshine. The demo had lots of technical problems that directly affected combat, especially the all-important parries. Now, that might sound like the kind of thing that gets fixed in the final months of development, and maybe it does, but I've been burned by this exact situation enough times to know that parry timing problems in a demo are rarely just a demo problem. These games are built on the loop of reading an enemy's windup and reacting at the right moment, and if the feedback isn't clean, the entire loop breaks. And again, this brings me back to Lords of the Fallen 2023, as it launched with tech issues that took months of patches to sort out. By the time the game was in a good shape, a lot of players had already made up their minds and moved on. Wo Long Fallen Fantasy had similar problems on PC at launch: stuttering, inconsistent frame pacing, input lag that made deflect timings feel off, even when you knew you'd press the button at the right moment. The window for a first impression in this genre is incredibly short. And once the community decides a game doesn't feel right, it's almost impossible to change even if you fix everything in a patch 6 weeks later or something. There's no release date yet, which in this case might be the most reassuring thing about the entire preview. It means they've got plenty of time. The question is whether they use it to polish the systems that need it most, or whether the pressure to ship pushes the game out before those fixes are ready. So is it even a Souls-like? The game's own Steam page says it offers a fresh take that sets it apart from other Souls-likes, and the devs have been pretty direct in interviews that they don't consider Swords of Legends to be a straight-up Souls-like. I think that's a fair way to frame what they're building, but I also think the distinction matters less than when people make it out to be. The foundation is Souls-like. You got the checkpoint system, the methodical boss encounters to get your progress, the emphasis on learning attack patterns and finding openings, the loop of dying and coming back stronger with better knowledge of what killed you. But later on top of that is the wuxia influence that speeds everything up, the soul capturing that adds a monster collector layer. Be careful with Nintendo, by the way. The artifact system looks like it'll be cool once it's fleshed out, and the wide linear world structure that pulls it closer to something like God of War 2018 than Dark Souls in terms of how you move throughout the environment. I mean, it's not exactly trying to reinvent the formula from scratch. It's just that it brings a different mythology to what has normally been dominated by dark European fantasy for more than a decade. There's a clear vision here for how the world and combat should feel. Once the technical issues aren't getting in the way, it will hopefully work. So after watching the full preview a few times and sitting with everything they showed, I really want to try it out myself. The combat looks like it has real personality, which puts it ahead of a lot of games in the space that nail the fundamentals but forget to have some of their own sauce, if you know what I mean. I think the whole becoming a Pokemon master but with demons could be pretty cool, and the visual design looks like the devs are having fun with its mythology instead of just keeping everything grim and self-serious from the first frame to the last. But those tech issues are the thing I can't stop thinking about. Every studio says their game will be polished by launch, and we've all heard that one enough times to know better than to take it at face value. The parry system is a mechanic that makes Swords of Legends feel different from other Soulslikes, but it's also the mechanic that was struggling in the demo. I guess we'll finally see how it lands once we see a few more previews in the future. And well, I think that's everything for now. I want to hear what you think. Does the combat look like it has enough going on to stand on its own? Is this even really a Souls-like? Either way, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a great one.